Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is an interview here with Justin Jordan, the writer of the Summoner's War comic book. It's an absolute honor to have you here. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to meet you for the first time. Thank you again for scheduling this interview with us. I think it's a really good opportunity for people who are fans of the franchise, fans of the IP, as well as, fans of comic books to kind of have this connection point where they can meet and discuss things that involve both.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
So I guess my first question, because I'm of the generation that wasn't super into comic books. I like them and I respect them, and I've developed more of an interest in them recently in my, the years of collecting here and there. But, I don't know too much about comic books. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what you do at Skybound, and then kind of like what your passions and how it led into that.
Sure. So I have always been a comic book fan. I am old enough that when I was a kid, you could actually get comic books kind of everywhere. Even when, so I grew up in and lived in extremely rural Pennsylvania. And so there aren't any comic book shops around now. But when I was a kid, you could go to grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations, and they all had some amount of comics and stuff now, which is not the case anymore. So literally one of my very earliest memories is of reading a Popeye comic that was the Sea Hag and the Goons were in it, I remember. And so I actually never got away from comics after that. But I can't draw. And I come from really rural Pennsylvania. When I was growing up, the internet was not quite yet a thing. So it didn't occur to me until I was in college. I actually had graduated college and I was working in local television that, hey, maybe this internet thing could help me find artists and I could do the comic book thing. I'd always liked writing and I had always written and I wanted to do that. I was just didn't see a path into comics, so I hadn't done that. So, after a nice quick 10 years of doing indie comics and anthologies and small press and that kind of stuff, I broke into regular comics. I broke in with a book called The Strange Talent of Luther Strode, which was a big hit out of the gate. So it ended up being one of those 10 years to an overnight success thing. And that actually came to the attention of Robert Kirkman, who is the creator of The Walking Dead and Invincible and that kind of stuff. And he is also the founder of Skybound. And so I started doing some comics at Skybound, and I've had a good relationship with them for a long time now. So when they were working with the company, the video game company behind Summoner's War, they were kind of looking to put together a writer's room that would expand the lore and kind of build out the story of the world beyond what was in the game. And this was a kind of multi-media sort of thing. The comic book is not the only thing that is going on there. So they actually reached out to me to do that because over the years, I've been pretty good at world building and that kind of stuff and making things kind of make sense, even though it's sort of a big thing. I spend far more time than is justified doing that. When I'm doing stuff, because it's easy compared to writing actual stories, right? That's why I think a lot of people when they're young get into this, like, I'm going to make up a world, and then they never actually tell stories and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it definitely goes with the popularity of D&D in the younger culture now as well, stuff like that.
It's like doing the Silmarillion without actually doing, The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings.
Exactly.
So they asked me to come on board, and I did that writer's room thing, and they wanted me to kind of spearhead the comics part of that, and it spun out of there, and I ended up doing the comic, which has been tremendous fun. I've really enjoyed Summoner's War, so I hope it's actually a hit.
I hope so as well. I love the franchise. Recently, we just came out with the new game for the franchise, so there's been a lot of like hype around kind of the IP itself and how it grows and expands, and I've always been like someone who pushes people to like, if you're not interested in that kind of genre, like there are all these other things that the IP can have, right? Like there are many extremely successful IPs out there that have tons of different genres of games, different mediums of media, right? So like, movies or comics or like a television series, or some even expand into like making an anime or making like, mobile games or PC games. Like there's all these different avenues you can take with that. So it's very really, it's hard to explain this. It's very heartwarming to me to see something that I've spent so much time on grow into this everlasting and expanding IP. Like I've been streaming Summoners War Sky Arena, the mobile game, for 6 years. So,
oh wow,
like knowing that someone as important as redeemed as you are working on a project like this is like, wow, like something that I've had a passion for and that I love is really growing and continuing to grow. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I hope we're doing a good job with the franchise. You know, me tries to be a good steward of whatever franchise that I sort of end up on. People have asked me about that in the past when I'm doing stuff. So I've done like Green Lantern, and I've worked on like Planet of the Apes and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, like I am just trying to figure out what people like about the world that I'm immersing myself in, and then do that. Like I, try to tell a good story and not break anything, and then I'm happy. So
yeah, exactly. So you were talking about being engrossed in the world building aspect when it comes to kind of these unknown IPs or like these newer IPs that don't have this expanded universe yet. Do you think you could possibly like walk me through like kind of your thought process when it comes to like starting at world building? I'm sure that a lot of people who will watch an interview like this will be people who are interested in things like, Dungeons and Dragons or, Pathfinder and all those things, like their own world building, right? How to create a story and how to create something that people can engage with. If you have any like kind of like rough tips or like, just like a basic process on what you do.
Yeah, I think it's always important to remember that world building isn't telling a story necessarily. It can be, right? Like I used the Silmarillion as an example, and 43 years in, I'm still not sure I actually pronounced that correctly, but there is actual story content there, but it sort of serves as a lot of lore for Middle Earth, and that kind of thing. It's easy to forget that, like, when you're creating races and places and people and things, that it's not quite a story, but there can be a story to the world. So when you take something like that, what you are kind of looking for is you basically want to create a world and a history that both feels natural. I won't say realistic. It's not so much that things are realistic, but it needs to feel naturalistic. It needs to feel like, because honestly, like realistic becomes unbelievable, because like the stuff that has happened in actual history, if you tell people that in fiction, they'll be like, no, they're just checking out, like, because it doesn't make any sense. It's people acting like maniacs and that kind of stuff. But you want something that feels like a real lived-in world, but you also want to create a base for which stories can take place, right? And so for me, when I'm doing any of that kind of world building, whether it's my own stuff or whether it's a franchise that I've come to, what I'm trying to looking for two things, which is what is the biggest canvas I can create to tell stories from that, right? So especially for something where you're doing an IP where they can tell all sorts of stories, right? And so within the context of Summoner's War, the world that exists of Aaliyah, like you can tell horror stories and you can tell war stories and you can tell heist stories and you can do all that kind of stuff. So it lends itself, to a lot of genres. So when you're thinking about the world building, you want to kind of lean into that and create a setting that gives you as many opportunities as exist that, can help you tell stories. The other part of that, though, is you want to create a world and a history and a lore that feels true to the experience of the game, right? Of the underlying IP and that sort of stuff. One of the things I talk about occasionally is that I think one of the great strengths of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that is not obvious is that those movies tend to feel like the best of the characters and the best of that world, right? Somebody, and I assume it's Kevin Feige, but I don't know, because I don't really know anybody at Marvel Studios, but they have looked at these properties and these franchises and said, okay, what do people like about Iron Man? What do people like about Thor? And what can we do to fit that into the world? And again, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you also have that sort of multi-genre sort of approach, right? An MCU movie is an MCU movie, but Captain America Winter Soldier is also a spy thriller, whereas, Ant-Man is kind of a heist movie and that sort of thing. And they move through that sort of stuff. So I'm trying to look at the franchise and try to figure out as best I can what people who already enjoy about the franchise so that I can create a story world that allows us to do more of that, right? And so, Summoners War, obviously, people like monsters and they like summoning and they like magic and, battles and that sort of thing. So a lot of what my role in that world building was filling out the world so that it gave maximum chances for that to happen, right? Like the kind of history and the kind of backstory that would provide a vehicle for engines to happen, for stories to happen. And I think we did a pretty good job. And that was by no means just me, right? That writer's room was, I think, 6 or 8 people. So there were a lot of us sort of working on it. And we were working off I think it was 300-page document of just lore and stuff about the world to kind of weave that into an actual world and story rather than just sort of facts. You know, you don't want just a Wikipedia entry. So, you know, we spent a good solid week in person doing that. And then we worked on it for months afterwards, you know, kind of doing our own thing and kind of working out what the world would be. So that is a long rambling answer that may or may not have actually answered the question.
I think it gave me a pretty good idea of, you know, how you want to build the world and like why you want to build the world, because it made me think. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, as someone who's played at a high level for a long time, you know, my first thoughts are, well, okay, so he mentioned that he wanted to create an avenue based on the things that I like. So for me, my first thoughts is, well, I really like Summoner's War because I appreciate the like war tactic strategy style that and genre that it brings. So seeing a comic or a movie or a TV show like involving that kind of stuff would definitely draw me in, right? So it got me thinking about like what I would want to see instead of just appreciating what I already see.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's sort of the way I think you have to think about these things, especially if you want to create kind of a big franchise out of it. If you want more than just one story to spin out of it, I think you need to look at what has made this a popular thing worth adapting to begin with. You know what I mean? It's kind of the fundamental part of it.
For sure. So we talked a little bit about, you know, kind of like what you do at Skybound. We talked a little bit about your history and how you got into comics, as well as like your process when it comes to world building. I do have another question for you, kind of involving like storytelling, but a little bit more on the history side. What inspired you to really pursue it past like the indie genre of comics? And as well, alongside that, what is actually your favorite genre to kind of work on, or like kind of world to build in? Do you have like a fantasy setting you prefer or anything like that?
That's a good question. Those all have kind of different answers. So
it's quite a multifaceted question. My apologies.
It is. So I liked comics. I like doing other stuff. I do work a little in television and movies, doing stuff as well. But man, with comics, you have this unlimited canvas, right? Like take Summoner's War, the comic book series, man. Like you could animate that, I suppose, but like if you tried to do it in live action, what we're doing in that thing, you're looking at like, you know, Game of Thrones budgets plus a bit. So that's just not a feasible sort of thing. But man, a comic, all you need is a writer, an artist, and the team, right? You kind of do it. So you have sort of this unlimited canvas to work with. You can kind of do anything in comics, and there's a lot of stuff. I won't get into it because it's very formalist stuff, but there's a lot of stuff you can do with a comic book form that you literally can't do with any other medium as well. And so that's part of what makes comics in particular exciting. And frankly, like straight up, I just love them. You know, I loved them when I was a kid, and I've never stopped loving them. So it can be frustrating, but like, you know, that's anything when you start doing it as a job and start, you know, kind of picking things apart. The genre that I actually probably like to work most in are horror and crime, which is not related to Summoner's War at all. And I don't do as much of that as I probably would like in my career, just because those are typically sort of hard sells to kind of try and work out. But I've done a fair bit of them. That's actually surprisingly what I have done at Skybound is I've done two miniseries of Dead Body Road, which is they're straight up crime stories just set in the real world. So not much in the way of world building is required. The other one is Reaver, which is sort of a grim, dark fantasy story, which is, you know, pretty brutal. And that did involve a lot of world building, which gets into the world building question. What I sort of like to build is I like worlds that are. It is really fun to do worlds that are really different than what we have in reality. It's fun to start from the ground up and figure out what the rules are. And then for me, the fun of that is figuring out the 2, 3, 4 steps from that sort of thing. So there's a saying about science fiction, and I have no idea who it originates with, but it's the person writing science fiction job isn't to imagine cars. It's to imagine traffic jams, right? It's to imagine those second and third order consequences of sort of doing stuff. And that's, you know, that happens in Summoner's War and that kind of stuff. Like, you know, you take the premise that oh, okay, there's people that are, they are able to summon monsters from a different realm, and that automatically kind of makes you an elite in society. Like, how does that, you know, how does the average person view that, and what are the consequences having that? Like, are they, equivalent to, like, if you're a really good summoner, are you the LeBron James of that world, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're that equivalent level of fame and sort of prestige, and like, and then what do the government start thinking about that and that kind of stuff? And most of that doesn't make it on the page, right? Not in a direct way. But when you've iterated those things out, you kind of end up having, it's the Hemingway iceberg thing, is you can say a little, but because you've thought it all through, it implies a lot. And I think that makes for a really immersive world. And that part is really fun. Like, it is really easy to get lost in that world building, and then you're like, oh, I guess I got to write a story now to justify my paycheck, because that's mostly what I'm getting paid for.
You're like, oh man, all the fun's done. Time to actually get to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you said, and I know you said you didn't necessarily want to get into it because a lot of it's like super fine details, but you were saying that there are things in comic books that you can do that you can't really do anywhere else. I was kind of just looking for like one specific example. When you mentioned it, my first thought was actually things like having panels that kind of bleed into other panels is something that I feel is like unique to comics and nothing else.
They absolutely do. So that is a very good example of one of the things that you can do in comics. But one of the other things is because a page is a unit, right? When you're watching like a movie or a television show, right, you are getting shown a sequence of events, and yeah, now you can stop and start and fast forward and all that kind of stuff. But like, it's linear. It's point A to point B. Mm-hmm. It is entirely possible to make a comic book page that you read left to right, top to bottom, but can also be read diagonally or in a Z shape. It's really hard to do, right? Like that kind of shenanigans is incredibly difficult to pull off successfully. But there's a comic called, I want to say it's Demon by Jason Shiga. That's an online comic. It's free. And you can actually, basically you move through it, and it's a kind, it couldn't exist in paper, not effectively, but like you can start at any point in that comic and go in any direction reading through it, and the story still makes sense, right? Like, that's
really cool.
That is literally something you can only effectively do with comics. You can't even manage it in novels, right? Prose can't do it. Movies can't do it. But in comics, you can do stuff like that. And there's a lot of that stuff, some of which is minor and some of which is really formal and out there, but it's cool. It's a fun medium to work in.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's a very unique connection that comic books has to video games, actually, compared to most things. Because I feel like there are some, generally RPGs, but there are generally some games that can be done in that way, especially the open world ones. So like, for example, like if you were playing a Fallout, or if you were playing like a Skyrim or something, where you can actually progress the game without following the natural storyline or like the natural linear progression. And it all still makes sense either way. But I'd never thought about that concept. But now that you mention it, I'm like, wow. Yeah. Comics are like video games you don't have to play.
Yeah, I had this. I don't know. I don't play video games much anymore. Back when I was more of a gamer, I had this quality, and so this is going back probably 15 years. So we're talking like Metal Gear Solid 2, like early Devil May Cry stuff. I had this knack for getting further in a game than I should for the level of like experience the character has racked up, but not being able to go back in the story. So I would just get stuck because I'm like, I am not powerful enough to deal with what the thing, but like I have made it through too many cutscenes to go back. So
yeah, that's definitely. I feel that. I think a lot of people nowadays actually like kind of take that concept and make it more of a challenge, right? So there's a lot of people who do like Kingdom Hearts, for example, has like a critical mode where you can only play the game with 1 HP, or you can have like a level 0 critical mode where you play with 1 HP and you're level 0 for the whole game, stuff like that. So like that kind of concept actually has evolved a lot. It's become a very popular thing for speedrunners to do challenge speedruns.
Yeah, I remember way back in the day, like when we first got the Nintendo and it came with Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, you would challenge yourself. Once you got good at Super Mario Brothers, especially if you couldn't afford a bunch of other games, you would just add increasing amounts of difficulty, like 1 life, like run through it as fast as you can, like, do the speed run and that kind of stuff. So it's always kind of cool. It's always sort of fun to see people doing like Battletoads speed runs because that game is ludicrous.
Yeah. And we see it every year too at GDQ, I believe. So it's just always cool to see like these old school kind of things just like continue to be brought back to life. Like I guess now we categorize most of them as retro, but like they're still amazing.
Oh yeah,
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just remember how games used to be. My go-to one is like Ghosts and Goblins, which was just ludicrously unfairly hard. Like it was probably the hardest game that was actually playable. Like there were some that were of that kind, right? We're talking 1985 era. So like, there were some that were just, they didn't work, right? Like they just were literally unplayable. But like Ghosts and Goblins with the like 2-hit death, like 1,000 things coming at you thing, I just remember like, man, this is just barely fun. Like,
yeah. Almost like the classic Toho. It's just like the bullet hell kind of games that you're playing.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple more questions I want to go over
Sure.
in the interview. The first thing I kind of want to go over just to lead in is there's, I believe, a comic book slated to be coming out on the 26th of May.
Yes, we're doing a Summoner's War comic, and it is. I am really pleased with it. I think it has turned out really well. In large part because Luca Coretti and Giovanna Nero have really killed it on art, and I apologize to Giovanna because I'm mutilating her name, I'm sure.
I'm sure she'll forgive you for the nice compliment though, either way. I'm not sure if you're able to talk about this, but if you are, do we know like how many issues are being slated to come out, and possibly like the rough estimate between release times for people who are really interested in the comic series?
Unclear. So with anything comics, anything in media, it's going to depend on how well the comic book does. I can tell you that I have currently written 12 issues of it. And so I'm hoping we get to at least issue 12. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a how long of a piece of string question, because I have a few story arcs that I would like to do, so we could go further than that, or we could go shorter if sales aren't there. But I'm hoping that people really dig it and justify going on, because I enjoyed writing it. It's so the first 6 issues are completely done and in the can. The second 6 are in progress as we speak. I think I'm allowed to say without Skybound sending a team of assassins out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll be sending this over to them to make sure before it goes live anywhere, just in case, But yeah, so I guess another question I have for you involving this is online versus paper. Do you have a preference? Do you think that one is kind of like fading out, or gaining a lot of traction when it comes to comic books?
Oh, honestly, I still prefer paper, and that is not even a storytelling related thing. That is a kind of tactile sort of thing. Like it feels real to me because I have a mild case of old. Having said that, I really enjoy writing the online stuff. So one of the other things I do is a webcomic called Urban Animal over at Webtoons, and this will relate to the rest of the question. Like, Urban Animal is currently, we've done 3 seasons so far. The 4th is in progress. It'll be debuting in about a month as we record this. That thing has 500,000 subscribers and gets 100,000-ish readers a week, which by Webtoon standards is sort of a medium kind of thing. Whereas in print comics, 100,000 puts you in the top 2 usually of any comic in any month in America. Yeah, Batman usually gets 100,000, although lately it's been hitting like 200K. But unless it's a really special month, that'll put you in the top 5 for sure. Now, it's not apples to apples, right? Because we are not charging for it, right? So it's not a fair comparison. But Urban Animal is just sort of a mid-tier. We're successful, but we're not their big dogs. The stuff like Let's Play and that sort of stuff gets millions of views a week. That in the bookstore is a much bigger market than comic book shops where you get your single issues and that kind of stuff. And I think that is probably the future. I love single issues and I love that kind of stuff, but I think we're in a situation right now where that stuff is vinyl, basically, where it's not, it's got a place, but it's not going to be the primary way it goes. And right now, without getting into an area that's probably not of interest to your viewers, but like, not only are we vinyl, we're vinyl that only plays basically is dominated by like German clown reggae. Like we're creating this thing that is like not really that popular with anybody that's not already into it. So that's sort of an issue. Whereas webtoons and, you know, the book publishers and stuff have kind of kicked that door wide open. I mean, in books, you get stuff that's for younger readers like Dogman, right? Like Dogman's Dave Pilkey's latest book had a 5 million copy print run, right? And that is absolutely a comic. It's even a superhero comic, right? It's just, but it's not there's a lot of comic book stories you could go in and they'd be like, what's Dogman? I'm like, yes, that's the problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think online is the future. And it's also, especially if you're doing like the infinite scroll and that kind of stuff, like Webtoons does, it is actually a really fun format to work in. It has made me a better writer, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And I'm trying to do more of that stuff as we go on, just because I think that's where the market goes.
That's interesting that your analysis comes to that. I feel like it's probably true. I mean, internet culture is taking over everything, right? Every aspect. Like we even have like NFTs now for literally everything, right? We have people who are buying the rights to something that physically exists. So it's interesting to see like kind of how the world has progressed over that. All forms of media have kind of shifted more towards this online function. Like even news, like news, for example, is regularly on YouTube that you can watch for free at any time.
Yeah.
Instead of, you know, we used to watch news ads all the time, watching it on TV. Every couple minutes it'd be an ad here and there, but we've kind of progressed past those kind of limitations. The reason I brought that question up is because I have never actually physically read a comic, but I read webtoons all the time, like Korean webtoons, English webtoons. I read all of them. And I actually decided to buy a second copy of the original Summoners War comic book so that I could read one, because the first copy I sent to CGC to get graded, along with, like, as you can see, the rest of my collectibles, sent everything in to get graded. But it would be interesting to see if comic books manages to make a notable resurgence in like physical comic books, because I know that like trading cards have become really popularized due to YouTube and media and streamers and such. But it would be interesting to see if we could find a way for a medium that can't necessarily be like openly broadcasted to people, but also is able to be like easily accessed for most people. Like if like a couple of huge YouTubers started talking about webtoons regularly, like maybe let's say a month, like 10 YouTubers that have like 3 million subscribers started talking about webtoons 3 times a week, I feel like webtoons would just instantly blow up in popularity.
Oh, it absolutely would. Well, the trick is with stuff with comics, especially, is it's relatively easy to get readers to pick up something once. It's hard to get them to build the habit if you don't start young. It has been. So by way of a direct, for instance, there was a Batman Fortnite comic that recently came out that has done huge numbers, and it's done huge numbers from people who don't ordinarily read comics. But a lot of them are just going in and grabbing that comic for the collectability or for the Fortnite aspect of it, and they're not buying anything else in comics. And it ends up being this chicken and the egg thing, right? Like, it's what you buy in comic book shops is often so specifically catered for the audience that already goes to comic book shops that it kind of excludes everyone else. So you have these giant movies and that kind of stuff where like they'll do it, and then people come in and it's just this incomprehensible thing, right? Like, it's one of those deals where like I said, I've literally read comics my entire life, and I've been a professional comic book writer for 11 years now. And if you ask me where to start with Spider-Man or Batman, right? Like, you're completely new to it. Like, where do you start? I'm like, I have no idea where to answer that question, right? Like, I could tell you where to start with One Piece, despite there being 1,000 volumes of it, because you start at the beginning, right? That's not how comics work, right? And that's frustrating. And it's the same way Webtoons works that way. If you're interested in Let's Play or Urban Animal or Tower of God, start at the beginning, go through. So that kind of stuff, yes, that is a much easier sell. And you know, if you get somebody like Logan Paul or somebody kind of less Logan Paul-y to say something, you know, with a giant audience, like, yeah, it would blow up Webtoons numbers and that kind of stuff. And I think we're ripe for it. Yeah, it's interesting, the collectibles aspect of it, especially since, you know, stuff like Pokemon cards or Magic cards even are so enormously popular as collectibles. I think there is potential for the physical comic, both as a collectible itself, which is, you know, a fairly prominent thing within comics, but also as just a physical object that people like, you know, like vinyl and that kind of stuff. But I don't think I don't think if comics as a form, I shouldn't say that. It's not if comics as a form are going to be viable. They will be. I just don't ever think that those single issue comics are going to be the dominant form. I think it's going to be webtoons, bookstore editions, and then probably, well, manga, but you can lump that in with bookstore things, and then, print single issue comics is probably the way it's going to go. But I do think there is potential for the pool of people who are interested in vinyl, so to speak, to become much, much larger than this right now. I think right now we've got this chicken and the egg thing where if you're not into that sort of thing, you don't go into comic book shops, but the only place to get comics like that is comic book shops. So there's no way to like really grow that market as it is.
Yeah, like I've been to comic book shops a lot, but never for comics, always for trading cards. Always for trading
exactly
cards.
So like, yeah. It's easy to get people in there to buy, Funko Pops and that kind of stuff. It is hard to sell them comics, which is why a lot of the successful comic book shops kind of end up as sort of all-purpose nerd stores, which is not a knock, right? Like were I running a comic book shop, that is exactly what I would do too. But there's something it's got to be frustrating to be like, I can sell 8,000, Deadpool t-shirts and Funko Pops and toys and statues and cards and can't sell the comics that the character came
exactly.
From, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think that maybe actually after COVID ends, I think a lot of people will probably dive into the comic book shops a lot more, with the kind of popularity of trading cards and collectibles and that such.
Oh, I hope so.
I guess my kind of question alongside like collectibles and trading cards and as well comic books, do you feel like physical comic books are like an affordable hobby for your average person?
No.
Not at all, right?
No, they aren't. I mean, like, no offense. As I said, I love comics, but like $4.99, $3.99 for 20 pages of story, 32 pages of book. It's just not like, and it's not that any individual issue is that expensive, right? Like that's a cup of coffee. But like, you don't roll in the Starbucks and feel, if you wanted to have it as a hobby and you're going to the Starbucks on a Wednesday and buying 30 cups of coffee, right? Like that adds up. And that is just not a model. And, that is not to say there are a lot of people in comics that have this belief is like, well, if comics were 99 cents, I'm like, we'd be out of business because there's not a market for them. But like, at the same time, it is absolutely true that as hobbies go, like it requires a fair bit of disposable income if you want to get the single issue. Trades are a lot more reasonable, but like, yeah, still, like if you're one of those people who's like, I got to read every Batman title that's out, which in any given month there's, I don't know, 10, like, well, there's $40, like right there, $50,
Yeah, and
for a lot
of people,
keep them
all too, it's even harder.
That's expensive.
Definitely. Yeah. Like if you keep them all as well, like if you're a collectible person on top of reading the comics, like suddenly it's like, okay, now that $40 is just like, either it's a long-term investment or it's just gone, right? Depending on how
and then, that's just the base pay, right? If you're like buying rare variant issues or whatever, and they get expensive the day of, and then like, you're going to have it slabbed and graded. Like, I don't know how much that costs anymore, but it's a lot. So like, yeah, you can basically shove money in a fire. Have a comics hobby if you want to.
For sure. You did mention something earlier about if someone were to ask you like, where do I start with Spider-Man or where do I start with Batman? You're like, there's no real like answer for that because is that because every issue is kind of its own standalone story, kind of how like
it's because it's because superhero comics in particular, so Marvel and DC, have a tendency to reset the continuity all the time, and they switch artists and they switch creators and that sort of stuff, right? So like you could literally start with Amazing Spider-Man #1 from the 60s, but the problem is like even the way that like trades and singles are numbered, they just restart, right? So like you can pick up a trade that says Batman 1 on it, right? That is by no means guaranteed to be the actual start of a run or something that you could read from 1 to 100, like you can with most manga. So that is an issue. That's the sort of thing that no other thing really does that, right? Like movies occasionally reboot and television shows occasionally reboot, But like, if you want to watch all the MCU movies, right, in order for whatever reason, like you can easily figure out, like, yep, start at Iron Man, go through this, right? Like, it is incredibly difficult to do with franchise characters like Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Thor, that kind of stuff. It is, and even when they do, even when they are, you can find that way in, they often cross over with other stuff and become so internecine that it's kind of impossible to follow them if you don't do it. Like straight up, like I do not read a lot of big two superhero comics, not because I don't like superheroes, but because I find them impossible to follow me. So let alone somebody who's coming into that, you from nothing. So like with the questions, like where do you start with Batman? Like, I don't know how to answer that. I can tell you some singular things that are easy, that are cool, that show you, like, and can tell you to read The Killing Joke, or I can tell you to read Dark Knight Returns, but like as an overall picture of like Batman and stuff, you're just sort of lost. And like, that's not a thing that other things do. You want to read The Hunger Games, start with The Hunger Games. And you want to read Harry Potter, you start with the Philosopher's Stone or the Sorcerer's Stone, depending which continent you're on. And you just go. But we in comics have got this sort of hyper fast reboot cycle and continuity snarl that makes it really impenetrable for readers.
That makes sense. So you mentioned basically like there's no continuity. It's like really hard to figure out where things are. Is there like a registry online anywhere for that, or like a resource that people could use if they really wanted to figure it all out?
No, there are fan made wikis and that kind of stuff. I've done most of my work for hire superhero stuff has been with DC Comics, and I have told them consistently over the years that they need to find someone that can create a database just keeping track of what's happening in every book that is searchable. And honestly, they could probably do it for nearly free. They just need to find a fan who's willing to do that and just send them a box of books every month. But they have never done it yet. So no, even for me, like when you're researching stuff, you're going into like these fan wikis and Wikipedia and like forums and stuff and just trying to figure out like what's in continuity and what isn't, and like where this character last was and are they dead and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
It's a mess. Yeah.
For sure. So I appreciate you coming on for this interview. I have one last question. I do this with all of my interviews, whether it's gaming related or non-gaming related. I always ask a secret question. So just like something I thought about but didn't want to like bring up until like right in the interview, because it's kind of nice to get that like immediate response answer. Obviously, it's going to be more of a generic question because we don't know each other super well. As well, you're welcome to ask me a question if you'd like. Since we've had this interview, you maybe have like a rough idea of kind of what I do, or if you have any like specific question, you're welcome to ask afterwards. But my question for you is, after kind of things tend to quiet down with COVID and we're able to like travel again a little more freely and, with more of a safety and security concept with that, what is the first thing that you want to do for you, like that you want to do that doesn't involve work, that doesn't involve like, it's one of those like, I want to do this, or I've always wanted to do this?
I would like to take another trip to Europe. It's not that I have not been, but I rarely am able to convince myself to go on proper vacations. And I have decided next year, if everything calms down with COVID, that I would like to kind of hit a sort of a pan-European tour. Like, so in an ideal world, and I don't know if time and finances will allow this, but I would like to spend a week or two in the UK with friends, and then sort of hit France and then Italy. I've been to Italy before and really enjoyed it, and just sort of mess around in Europe and not work for a couple of weeks, but we'll see if that is possible.
It's always hard though. I'd like to take a vacation, but I have work. It's a
yeah, I am terrible at it. I tend to either have time or money, and rarely both. I shouldn't say that. That used to be the case. I've done okay financially, but it's really just making myself not work for any period of time. It's one of the things that's been rough about COVID, right, is that I realized the comic book conventions tend to give me a break away from writing, because I can't write while I'm at cons. The same part of my brain I used to talk to people is the same part I write with, apparently. So I can do one or the other or not both. And so the way those spaced out over the year, they were basically every 3 months. And I didn't go to any cons last year, will not be going to any this year. And I've realized that I will just write and work until I just burn out. So I know I need to take a week off every 12 weeks. I have not done so in 2021, so you can see how great that's going so far. I was trying to take this week off, and it did not materialize. Not anything related to you. It was just has not happened. So hopefully I can fit in a vacation here soon.
Yeah, I feel that. So for a little bit of context of what I do, I live stream full time. So I've been live streaming. I've been live streaming video games full time for about 3.5 years, but I've been doing it as a whole for almost 6 years now, 5.5, 6 years. But I actually haven't missed a single day for 577 days, I believe. I've streamed every single day for 577 days. Man. So like I know exactly what you mean when you say that. Like conventions were the break, right? I used to go to PAX. Last year 2019 I got my first opportunity to go to New York Comic Con. I was working at the Epic 7 booth with them, and it was just like,
nice.
It was really cool because I went there, I worked with a different booth, I got the chance to spend time with the Summoners War people as well, and I got my like first real experience with a comic book convention compared to everything else. Like I'd always wanted to go to San Diego Comic Con and stuff. I've been to the PAXs, I've been to TwitchCon, I've been to like E3 and stuff like that, but I'd never had the opportunity to go, and I've been to anime festivals, but I've never had the opportunity to go to a comic book convention and really see like what that culture is like, because it's very different from everything else. It's very, very different.
Oh, is it? Yeah, I've never been to anything but comic book conventions, so I don't really know.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think the cool thing for comic book conventions for me is that everybody is there for their own personal reason, and everyone is there for a reason that does not necessarily pertain to like one person or one individual group. Like TwitchCon is very much people go there to see their favorite creators or to meet their friends, right? And then like E3 is very much like people go there for video game news and parties, and then like PAX is people go there for parties. I feel like PAX has always just been like the party. Still, San Antonio's crazy for the nightlife and stuff, but comic book conventions feel more. It feels more like it's about the con and less about the things after the con. So
I think that's fair.
Yeah, so like people go there and spend like their entire day there. Whereas like I felt like with PAX, people go there, they do a couple businessy things, check some stuff out, and then it's like, okay, what's the party we're going to tonight? Who are we meeting for dinner? Stuff like that. Whereas like it's just got a very wholesome environment that I really enjoyed.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I like New York Comic Con a lot. Actually, I have only missed one. Not the first one. I didn't always table there, right? But I've been to every New York Comic Con except for the third one. That will probably not be the case this year, since they are apparently still planning to have one in October. And I am fully vaccinated, but I am not as yet comfortable hanging out with 50,000, 100,000. I say 50,000. New York Comic Con is actually like 125,000 people. Like, yeah, that's too many people in one building. Like, that's not having it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I don't think psychologically I can deal with it. I need to get a little less feral than I've become and ease my way back into society.
Yeah, I feel it. Being locked in our homes for so long, and like the ability to work from home like enables the fact that we don't have to go out, so we kind of just like thrive in that. Need to.
Oh yeah, I messaged a friend. I was doing something. I was walking around just making what I could only describe as like a Bigfoot mating call, and I'm like, I am not fit for human society anymore. I'm going to need like training. I'm going to have to go to like puppy classes or something just to socialize me again. So
that's funny. Yeah. Did you have a question that you were interested in asking me? Anything you want to know about my life?
What was the first game you played?
Like when I was super young, like a kid?
Yeah.
The first game I ever played was Ogre Kingdom 64 on the Nintendo 64 because my uncle loved playing that, and it's the thing that got me into tactics RPGs. So I played Ogre Kingdom 64 when I was like 5, and I beat the game when I was 7. Nice. And then I think my next game from that was Final Fantasy Tactics, and then I delved into playing Fire Emblem games. And I played most of the Fire Emblem games up until maybe the Wii, and then nowadays like I love tactics games. I play them, I watch them. I'm not nearly as astute as I used to be when it comes to the tactics and like playing the extremely difficult modes for them. But
yeah, my best friend loves tactics. He loved Final Fantasy Tactics, but also the Metal Gear 1 tactics type game that they had. Its name escapes me, but like he was always big in the tactics games. I was always more of I liked sort of RPG kind of stuff. What I realized was a lot of stuff is I kind of default to two things. Like I like games that are just like racing games or fighting games that are just action, or I like stuff with a story and I'm just sort of doing the action to kind of make my way through the story. So like Final Fantasy VII was my jam for that kind of stuff. It's funny. I remember when I was in college, when the N64 came out. So yes, I am impossibly ancient. And we made the mistake of my one roommate got one literally during finals week, right? And like we're playing like the Super Mario 64. We're like, this was a bad idea. We're gonna flunk out of college. Like we have got to not keep doing this. So
yeah, video games have always been such an amazing thing. I think it's really cool though that we can connect over that. Like, you know, the difference in our age and generation, like we still share a lot of similar interests. And I think that that's a beautiful thing about like current society, is that age kind of like has petered out as a definitive difference between people, right? It's like, wow, you like comic books, I like comic books, or like, hey, I like video games, you like video games, I like anime, you like anime. You know, people have become a lot more accepting of that kind of stuff.
It's also nice, speaking as an outer nerd, that like stuff like video games were always pretty mass culture, but man, when I was a teenager, it was really hard to get like anime and that kind of stuff, right? Like, especially with stuff like Golgo 13 or like, you know, like adult anime, not hentai. We weren't that far to college, but like, you know, that kind of stuff. And you're like, you'd find it like, you got like one at the video stores, like Ghost in the Shell. You're like,
oh yeah, for sure. No, Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, but now you can just roll with it and stuff. Like I'm still making my way through like a backlog of anime that I wanted to watch when I was young and just couldn't find. So I'm making my way through stuff like that, Appleseed and things like that. I'm like, not anything obscure. I'm like, I just couldn't get it when I was
just the access to that kind of like media was not quite there. Like even now, there's a lot of things that are kind of like exclusive to regions. So like for example, like certain games are exclusive to like a PS Vita Japan region locked, for example. So like you can only play certain games if you have a Japanese PS Vita. And so like there are people who like go out of their way to create a market for that. You know, they'll create trading places and stuff like that. It's crazy to see the entrepreneurship that has come from people's hobbies and people's interests. And most of it really leads around access to things that are exclusive. And I don't know. I just think it's amazing. I think that it's neat that we've progressed from people being very cliquey and very against certain stereotypes to now like nerd culture is a popular thing. Nerd culture is more popular than most things, right? Anime culture is more popular than most things. Video game culture is extremely normalized. We have things like Twitch and YouTube. You know, if you're in Korea, you have Africa TV, or if you're in China, you have Panda TV and stuff like that. Like you have all these localized ways to access that kind of media that it is okay to have hobbies now, right? It's not like you don't have to be ashamed of your hobbies. Like, you know, some people used to be in the past.
No, it's awesome. Yeah, it is this kind of golden age where there is more content just across the board that I like than I can actually consume, which is a kind of awesome place to be in.
Yeah. No, it's good. I think video games is a perfect example of that. Like, if you ask any random person like my age or even like maybe in their 30s, and you're like, okay, open your Steam and see how many games you have in there that you haven't played. Most of us will be like, we played like less than 10% of our games. Like we just own so many games that we've never played because it's like, I want to buy this because it's on sale and maybe I'll play it one day. Never get to it because there's just so much content and so much access to content.
Yeah, no, it's tremendous. Like, and it's kind of relatively cheap most of the time, which is also pretty nice. So yeah, it's a different animal than when I was coming up, and a better one, I think. So I like all that.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you again for joining me here for the interview. Did you have any last things you want to say to the viewers, or any like a piece of advice you want to give, or anything like that?
Yeah, I hope you check out Summoner's War. It'll be available through Comixology at Amazon if you prefer to get it kind of digitally. Otherwise, it is in your finer comic book shops, which is defined by stocking my comics like Summoner's War. That's how you know it's a finer comic book shop. But yeah, if you guys like Summoner's War, I really hope you get into the comic and give it a shot.
So just a reminder, everybody, the first edition is already out, I believe. Second issue should be out May 26th. I will confirm that before we post that in the video, but it should be there. So, hopefully you guys can check it out and let me know what you think. You guys can always reach me at my stream, anything like that. Do you have any social medias or anything that you would want people to follow? Or
yeah, I mean, on my Facebook page is Justin Jordan Comics, as is my Instagram, actually. I'm currently in the process of getting my webpage revamped, but if you Google Justin Jordan Comics, it'll take you to that. So I've mostly staked out the Justin Jordan Comics space pretty well.
Sounds good. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this interview here with Justin Jordan, the writer of the Sun Resort comic, and thank you so much for being here.